I should have known that buying a house on Maple Ridge Drive in Sterling Heights, Michigan would come back to haunt me, but the price was right, and the neighborhood looked peaceful enough when I toured it in June. What nobody mentioned during the closing process was that the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association had a president named Brenda Killinger who treated the community bylaws like they were carved into stone tablets on Mount Sinai. My name is Marcus Ashford, and I run a small snow removal business that I started 5 years ago after getting laid off from the automotive plant. The business had grown steadily, and I now had 3 trucks, 2 employees, and about 40 regular clients scattered across Macomb County. When I moved into my new house on Maple Ridge Drive in September, I figured living there would be convenient since I could plow my own driveway and maybe pick up a few neighbors as clients. I had no idea that decision would turn into the biggest headache of my professional life. The trouble started in late January during the first major snowfall of the season. We got hammered with about 14 inches overnight, and my phone started ringing at 4 in the morning with clients needing their driveways and parking lots cleared before the morning rush. I spent the entire day in my truck, running from one job to the next, barely stopping to eat or use the bathroom. My own driveway was last on the list because, honestly, I lived alone and could park on the street if needed. My clients were paying me good money to make sure they could get to work, and they took priority. I finally got home around 9 that evening, exhausted and ready to collapse. My driveway still had about 13 inches of snow on it, packed down in some places where I'd driven over it that morning. I planned to clear it first thing in the morning before heading out to do my second round of clients, but apparently that was not acceptable to Brenda Killinger. The next day, I found a notice taped to my front door. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, with the association's logo at the top and Brenda's signature at the bottom. The notice informed me that I was in violation of Section 7.3 of the Maple Ridge HOA bylaws, which stated that all driveways must be cleared of snow within 24 hours of snowfall cessation. The fine was $100. I stood there in the cold, reading the notice 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. 24 hours seemed reasonable enough, except the snow had stopped falling around 6 in the morning the previous day, and it was now 7 in the morning, which meant I still had plenty of time. I checked my watch and did the math again. Snow stopped at 6 yesterday morning, and it was 7 this morning, so that was 25 hours. Technically, I was 1 hour over the deadline. I called the number listed on the notice and got Brenda's voicemail. I left a polite message explaining that I ran a snow removal business, had been working all day serving my clients, and had simply prioritized paying customers over my own property. I said I'd be happy to pay a reduced fine or have it waived since this was my first violation and I was only 1 hour late. I even offered to plow the HOA's common areas for free as a gesture of goodwill. Brenda called me back that afternoon. Her voice was sharp and nasal, the kind of tone that immediately puts you on the defensive. "Mr. Ashford, the bylaws are very clear. 24 hours means 24 hours, not 25, not 26. You were in violation and the fine stands." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "But I run a snow removal business. I was out plowing all day. Doesn't that count for something?" "What you do for a living is irrelevant," she replied. "If anything, as someone in the snow removal business, you should understand better than anyone the importance of keeping properties clear. The fine is $100, payable within 10 days. I paid the fine, but it left a bad taste in my mouth. $100 was not going to bankrupt me, but it was the principle of the thing. I had been 1 hour late clearing my own driveway because I was busy making sure 40 other people could get to work on time. It felt petty and vindictive. 2 weeks later, we got another major snowfall, this time about 10 inches. I learned my lesson and made sure to plow my own driveway within the 24-hour window, even though it meant rearranging my entire schedule and making several clients wait longer than they wanted. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. This time, the notice complained that I had piled the snow too close to the street, creating a visibility hazard. Section 9.2 of the bylaws apparently stated that snow piles must be at least 3 feet from the curb. I measured the distance and found that my pile was exactly 2 feet and 8 inches from the curb. Another $100 fine. I called Brenda again, this time less polite. "You've got to be kidding me. 4 inches. You're fining me over 4 inches. The bylaws exist for everyone's safety, Mr. Ashford. Visibility is a serious concern, especially with children in the neighborhood." "There are no children on my street," I shot back. "Everyone here is either retired or works full-time. I've never even seen a kid playing outside." "That's beside the point. The rules apply equally to everyone." I paid the second fine, but now I was getting angry. Brenda was clearly targeting me, and I could not figure out why. I kept my lawn mowed in the summer, my house painted, my garbage cans stored properly. I was not running a meth lab or hosting wild parties. I was just a guy trying to make a living. The pattern continued through February and into early March. Every time it snowed, I would get some kind of violation notice. My snow pile was too high, blocking the sight line from a neighbor's window. I had not salted my sidewalk within 12 hours of plowing. My truck was parked in the driveway with the plow attachment still on, which apparently violated the commercial vehicle restriction in Section 12.4. Each fine was $100, and they were adding up fast. By mid-March, I had paid $800 in fines, and I was ready to explode. I attended the monthly HOA meeting, which was held in the community clubhouse on the last Wednesday of the month. About 20 people showed up, most of them retirees who had nothing better to do than complain about their neighbors. Brenda sat at the head of the table, shuffling through papers and calling the meeting to order with a wooden gavel that she seemed to enjoy wielding a little too much. I waited until the open forum portion of the meeting and raised my hand. Brenda acknowledged me with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Ashford, what can we do for you?" I stood up, trying to keep my voice calm. "I want to talk about the snow removal fines. I've received 8 violations in the past 2 months, and I think they're excessive and unfair. I run a snow removal business, and I'm doing my best to comply with the bylaws while also serving my clients. I'd like to request that the board consider reducing or waiving some of these fines." Brenda did not even pretend to consider it. "The bylaws are the bylaws, Mr. Ashford. They apply to everyone equally. If you're having trouble complying, perhaps you should reconsider your business priorities." An older man sitting near the front, someone I recognized from down the street but whose name I did not know, spoke up. "Seems to me like the kid is trying his best. 8 fines in 2 months is a bit much, don't you think?" Brenda's face hardened. "The number of fines is irrelevant." Each violation was documented with photographic evidence and measured precisely. Mr. Ashford has consistently failed to meet the community standards. I felt my face getting hot. Community standards. I'm 4 inches off on a snow pile placement, and you're treating me like I'm running a crack house. This is ridiculous. "This meeting is not the place for personal attacks," Brenda said, her voice rising. "If you have a formal complaint, you can submit it in writing to the board for review." I did submit a formal complaint. a 3-page letter detailing each fine and explaining why I thought they were excessive. The board's response came 2 weeks later, a single paragraph stating that my complaint had been reviewed and denied. All fines would stand, and failure to pay would result in additional penalties and possible legal action. That was when I decided Brenda needed to learn a lesson about what happens when you push someone too far. The idea came to me during another overnight snowfall in late March. We got about 8 inches, which was unusual for that time of year but not unheard of in Michigan. As I sat in my truck at 3 in the morning, plowing a shopping center parking lot in Warren, I started thinking about Maple Ridge Drive and the fact that it was the main artery connecting our subdivision to the major roads. Everyone who lived in Maple Ridge Estates, about 300 homes in total, had to use Maple Ridge Drive to get in or out. There was no alternate route. The city of Sterling Heights was responsible for plowing the main roads, but they did not touch the subdivision streets. That was the HOA's responsibility, and they contracted with a local company called Great Lakes Property Services to handle it. I knew the owner, a guy named Tom who I had worked with on a few joint projects. I also knew that Great Lakes' contract with the Maple Ridge HOA was up for renewal at the end of March, and Tom had mentioned he was thinking about not renewing it because Brenda was impossible to work with. I called Tom the next morning. "Hey, it's Marcus. You still planning to drop the Maple Ridge contract?" "Absolutely," Tom said. "That Brenda woman is a nightmare. She calls me every 5 minutes during a snowfall, complaining that we're not working fast enough or that we missed a spot. I've got 20 other clients who pay better and cause half the headache. I'm done." "What if I told you I want to take over the contract?" There was a pause. "You serious? You live there, don't you? I thought you hated that HOA." "I do," I said, "but I've got a plan." "Can you introduce me to the board and recommend me as a replacement?" Tom laughed. "Sure, but I'm warning you, Brenda is going to make your life hell. Let me worry about that." Tom made the introduction, and I submitted a bid to the HOA board to take over snow removal for the subdivision. My bid was 15% lower than what Great Lakes had been charging, which made it very attractive to the budget-conscious board members. Brenda was skeptical, but the numbers spoke for themselves. In early April, I signed a 1-year contract to provide snow removal services for all common areas and streets within Maple Ridge Estates, starting the following November. I spent the rest of the spring and summer building up my business and preparing for the winter. I bought a 4th truck and hired another employee, a young guy named Jake who had just graduated from high school and needed work. I also spent a lot of time studying the HOA bylaws, particularly the sections related to snow removal and contractor obligations. The contract I had signed was fairly standard. It required me to plow all streets and common areas within 12 hours of snowfall cessation, maintain clear access to fire hydrants and mailboxes, and respond to emergency calls within 2 hours. There were performance penalties for failure to meet these standards, but nothing too severe. What the contract did not specify, however, was how quickly I had to plow or what methods I could use. November arrived, and with it came the first snowfall of the season. It was light, only about 3 inches, and I handled it without any issues. I plowed all the streets in Maple Ridge Estates within 8 hours, well ahead of the 12-hour deadline. Brenda did not call to complain, which I took as a minor victory. The second snowfall came in early December, about 6 inches. Again, I completed the job within the required time frame, and again, no complaints. I started to wonder if maybe Brenda had decided to leave me alone now that I was a contractor rather than just a homeowner. I should have known better. In mid-December, We got hit with a major storm that dumped 18 inches of snow over 2 days. It was the kind of storm that shuts down schools and causes the governor to declare a state of emergency. I was out plowing for 36 hours straight, running on coffee and adrenaline, making sure all my clients were taken care of. I saved Maple Ridge Estates for last, which was allowed under the contract, since the snow had only stopped falling about 6 hours earlier. I started plowing the main streets around 9 at night, working methodically through the subdivision. The streets were empty, and the work went smoothly. I finished around 3 in the morning and went home to collapse. The next day, I got a call from Brenda. "Mr. Ashford, I need to speak with you about your performance last night." "What about it?" I asked, already knowing this was not going to be pleasant. "Several residents have complained that you were plowing very slowly and that the noise from your truck kept them awake until the early morning hours." I almost laughed. "Brenda, we just got 18 inches of snow. Of course it took a while to plow. And yes, snow plows are loud. That's how they work. I expect better performance from our contractors," she said coldly. "If you cannot complete the work in a reasonable time frame and with reasonable noise levels, we may need to reconsider this contract." "The contract says 12 hours, I replied. "I finished in 10. I'm ahead of schedule. The spirit of the contract is that you will provide timely and considerate service to our residents." "The spirit of the contract," I repeated. "Brenda, I'm a snow removal contractor, not a mind reader. I did exactly what the contract requires, and I did it well." She hung up on me. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by Brenda and 2 other board members, stating that they had received complaints about my slow and inconsiderate plowing during the December storm. The letter warned that future violations of the spirit of the contract could result in termination and financial penalties. That was the moment I decided to implement my plan. I waited for the next major snowfall, which came in early January. The forecast called for 12 to 15 inches overnight, starting around midnight and continuing through the morning. It was a weekday, which meant everyone in Maple Ridge Estates would need to get to work the next day. Perfect. The snow started right on schedule, and my phone began ringing with clients requesting service. I spent the night plowing parking lots and driveways, working efficiently and quickly to get everyone taken care of. By 8 in the morning, I had completed all my regular clients except for Maple Ridge Estates. Under the contract, I had until midnight to finish plowing the subdivision streets, which gave me 16 hours. I decided to use every single one of them. I drove to Maple Ridge Estates around 9 in the morning, just as people were starting to realize they were trapped. The main road, Maple Ridge Drive, was buried under about 13 inches of snow, completely impassable. The side streets were even worse. I could see people standing in their driveways, staring at the snow in frustration, talking on their phones, trying to figure out how to get to work. I parked my truck at the entrance to the subdivision and started plowing, but I did it at an absolute crawl. Normally, I would plow a street like Maple Ridge Drive in about 20 minutes, making quick, efficient passes to clear the snow and push it to the sides. Instead, I took my time, moving at about 2 miles per hour, carefully positioning every pile of snow exactly 3 feet from the curb to ensure perfect compliance with the bylaws. I stopped frequently to measure distances with a tape measure, take photographs for my records, and adjust the snow piles. By 10 in the morning, I had plowed about 200 feet of Maple Ridge Drive, which was roughly 1/10 of the total length. People were starting to notice. I saw a man in a business suit trudging through the snow toward me, waving his arms. "Hey, what are you doing? We need to get out of here. I rolled down my window and gave him a friendly smile. "Just doing my job, sir. Snow removal per the HOA contract. You're going way too slow." "At this rate, it's going to take all day. The contract gives me until midnight," I said pleasantly. "I'm well within my time frame." He stared at me in disbelief, then turned and trudged back to his house, presumably to call someone and complain. My phone rang a few minutes later. It was Brenda. "Mr. Ashford, what is going on? I have 15 residents calling me saying you're plowing at a snail's pace." "I'm being very careful to ensure full compliance with all HOA bylaws," I explained. "I'm measuring every snow pile to make sure it's exactly 3 feet from the curb, documenting everything with photographs, and taking my time to avoid any violations. I learned my lesson from all those fines you gave me." There was a long silence. "You're doing this on purpose." "I'm doing this according to the rules," I corrected. "Isn't that what you always wanted?" She hung up, and I went back to plowing at my leisurely pace. By noon, I had completed about a quarter of Maple Ridge Drive, and the situation was getting desperate. People were calling their employers, explaining that they were snowed in and could not get to work. Some were trying to walk out to the main road, trudging through thigh-deep snow with briefcases and purses. A few enterprising individuals were attempting to shovel their own paths through the snow, but they quickly realized it was futile. The snow was too deep, and even if they cleared their own driveways, they could not get past the unplowed streets. Around 1 in the afternoon, a woman approached my truck. She was in her 30s, dressed in scrubs, and she looked exhausted. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm a nurse at Beaumont Hospital. I was supposed to be there 3 hours ago. They're short-staffed and people need me. Can you please just clear enough of the road so I can get out?" I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. This was not about the nurse or the businessman or any of the other individual residents. This was about Brenda and the HOA board learning that their petty enforcement of bylaws had consequences. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I'm working as fast as I can while staying in compliance with all HOA regulations. If you have a complaint, you should speak to the HOA president, Brenda Killinger." The nurse's expression hardened. "I will." She turned and walked back through the snow, pulling out her phone as she went. By 3 in the afternoon, I had completed about half of Maple Ridge Drive, and the entire subdivision was in chaos. People were angry, frustrated, and stuck. The HOA's phone line was apparently ringing off the hook, and Brenda was getting an earful from dozens of residents who could not get to work, pick up their kids from school, or go about their daily lives. Brenda called me again around 4. "Mr. Ashford, this is unacceptable. You need to speed up immediately." "I'm working at a pace that ensures full compliance with the bylaws," I repeated. "If I go faster, I risk creating violations like the ones you fine me for. Snow piles too close to the curb, visibility hazards, uneven clearing. I'm just trying to avoid any penalties." "Don't play games with me," she hissed. "I know exactly what you're doing and it's going to backfire. I'll have you fired and sued for breach of contract." "The contract says I have 12 hours from snowfall cessation," I said calmly. "The snow stopped at 8 this morning, which means I have until 8 tonight. I'm on schedule to finish by 7, which is an hour ahead of deadline. I'm in full compliance." She let out a string of obscenities that I will not repeat here and hung up. I continued plowing at my glacial pace, stopping frequently to measure and document. By 6 in the evening, I had completed about 75% of the main road, and the situation had gone from chaotic to downright hostile. People were standing in the street, yelling at me as I drove past. Someone threw a snowball at my truck, which bounced harmlessly off the plow blade. I ignored them all and kept working. At 7:30, just as the sun was setting, I completed the final pass on Maple Ridge Drive. The road was now clear, plowed to perfection, with every snow pile positioned exactly 3 feet from the curb. I moved on to the side streets, working with the same meticulous care, measuring and photographing as I went. I finished the entire subdivision at 11:45, 15 minutes ahead of the midnight deadline. I drove home, parked my truck, and went inside to sleep. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. Voicemails from Brenda, emails from board members, text messages from residents. All of them were angry, all of them demanded explanations, and all of them threatened various forms of retaliation. I ignored them all and went back to work, plowing my regular clients. The HOA held an emergency meeting that evening, and I was summoned to attend. I showed up at the clubhouse to find about 50 residents packed into the room, all of them glaring at me as I walked in. Brenda sat at the head of the table, her face red with anger. "Mr. Ashford," she began, her voice tight, "your performance yesterday was absolutely unacceptable. You caused dozens of residents to miss work, important appointments, and other obligations. Some people were not able to get their children from school. A nurse was unable to get to the hospital for her shift. This is a serious breach of your contract." I pulled out a folder and set it on the table. "Actually, it's not. The contract specifies that I must complete plowing within 12 hours of snowfall cessation. I finished in 15 hours and 45 minutes, which is well within the deadline. I have photographs and time stamps documenting the entire job. Every snow pile is positioned exactly 3 feet from the curb, every fire hydrant is clear, every mailbox is accessible. I followed the bylaws to the letter." One of the board members, a man in his 60s named Gerald, leaned forward. "But you deliberately worked slowly to cause problems for the residents. That's not in the spirit of the contract." I turned to him. "The spirit of the contract. That's interesting. You see, for months, Brenda here has been fining me for trivial violations of the bylaws. 4 inches too close to the curb, 1 hour late on plowing, parking my work truck in my own driveway. She told me repeatedly that the bylaws are the bylaws and that they must be followed exactly. So that's what I did. I followed the bylaws exactly." Brenda slammed her hand on the table. "You're playing word games. You know perfectly well that your behavior was intended to cause harm to the residents." "Was it intended to cause harm?" I asked. "Or was it intended to demonstrate how absurd it is to enforce bylaws with zero flexibility or common sense? Because that's what you've been doing to me for months. Fining me for being 1 hour late when I was out working all day to help other people. Fining me for snow piles that were 4 inches off. You showed me no consideration, no understanding, no flexibility. So I decided to show you what it looks like when someone follows the rules with the same rigid, inflexible attitude." The room was silent. Several residents were nodding, and I could see a few people whispering to each other. An older woman near the back stood up. "I think Mr. Ashford has a point. Brenda, you've been way too harsh on people in this community. I got fined last year because my mailbox post was painted the wrong shade of white. White. It was ridiculous." Another man chimed in. "She fined me because my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. I had just forgotten to bring them in after work. It was one day." Brenda's face was getting redder. "The bylaws exist for a reason. If we don't enforce them, this community will fall apart." "Or," I said quietly, "the community could function just fine if we all treated each other like reasonable human beings instead of looking for every tiny violation to punish." Gerald cleared his throat. "I think we need to take a step back and consider this situation carefully." Mr. Ashford, while I understand your frustration, you did cause significant disruption to the community. That's not acceptable, regardless of your motivations." "I agree," I said, "and I apologize to everyone who was inconvenienced yesterday. That was not my intention. My intention was to show the board what happens when rules are enforced without any consideration for context or human factors. I think I made my point. Brenda was not having it. You're fired, effective immediately, and will be pursuing legal action for breach of contract." "On what grounds?" I asked. "I fulfilled the contract. You have no legal basis for termination or damages." Gerald held up a hand. "Let's not be hasty. Brenda, I think we need to discuss this as a board before making any decisions." The meeting dissolved into chaos, with residents arguing among themselves about whether I should be fired, whether Brenda was too strict, and whether the bylaws needed to be revised. I slipped out quietly and went home. Over the next few days, the situation continued to escalate. Brenda sent me a termination letter, which I forwarded to a lawyer friend who laughed and said she had no grounds for it. Several residents started a petition to remove Brenda from the board, citing her excessive enforcement of bylaws and poor judgment. The petition gained traction quickly, and within a week, it had over 100 signatures. The HOA scheduled another emergency meeting to address the petition and the ongoing conflict. This time, the room was even more packed, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Brenda looked exhausted, her usual crisp appearance replaced with wrinkled clothes and dark circles under her eyes. Gerald called the meeting to order and addressed the crowd. "We're here to discuss the petition to remove Brenda Killinger from her position as HOA president, as well as the ongoing dispute with our snow removal contractor, Mr. Ashford. Let's try to keep this civil." It was not civil. For the next 2 hours, residents stood up one after another to air their grievances about Brenda's leadership. Stories of ridiculous fines, petty enforcement, and hostile interactions poured out. A man said he had been fined because his lawn was mowed in the wrong direction. A woman said she had been fined because her holiday decorations were up one day past the allowed date. Another man said Brenda had called the city to report his car as abandoned because it had not moved in 3 days, even though he had been sick and bedridden. Through it all, Brenda sat silently, her face growing paler and paler. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up slowly and addressed the crowd. "I have dedicated 5 years of my life to this community," she said, her voice shaking. "I have worked tirelessly to maintain property values, enforce standards, and ensure that Maple Ridge Estates remains a desirable place to live. Everything I have done has been in accordance with the bylaws that you all agreed to when you bought your homes here. If you don't like the bylaws, then change them, but don't blame me for enforcing them." A man in the front row stood up. "The problem isn't the bylaws, Brenda. It's the way you enforce them. You have no compassion, no flexibility, no understanding. You treat people like criminals over the smallest things. That's why we want you gone." The vote was held at the end of the meeting. Out of the 230 residents present, 187 voted to remove Brenda from the board. She was out. Gerald was appointed interim president, and one of his first acts was to call me and apologize. "Marcus, on behalf of the board, I want to say I'm sorry for how you've been treated. Brenda was out of line, and we should have reined her in a long time ago. I hope you'll continue as our snow removal contractor." "I will," I said, "but I want something in return. Name it. I want all my fines from last year refunded, and I want a written apology from the board acknowledging that the enforcement was excessive and unfair." "Done," Gerald said without hesitation. You'll have both by the end of the week." He kept his word. I received a check for $800 and a formal letter of apology from the board. They also revised the bylaws to include language about reasonable enforcement and consideration of extenuating circumstances. It was not a perfect system, but it was better than what Brenda had created. But the story does not end there. About 3 weeks after Brenda's removal, I got a call from a resident named Sharon who lived on the same street as Brenda. Sharon sounded nervous. "Marcus, I think you should know something. Brenda has been doing some weird stuff since she got voted out." "What kind of weird stuff?" I asked. "She's been walking around the neighborhood at night, taking pictures of people's houses. I saw her measuring the distance between someone's mailbox and the street with a tape measure. And yesterday, I heard her on the phone with someone, talking about filing complaints with the city." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Complaints about what?" "I don't know, but she sounded really angry. I think she's trying to cause trouble." I thanked Sharon and hung up, then called Gerald to let him know. He sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this. Brenda didn't take the removal well. I'll reach out to her and ask her to stop." Whatever Gerald said to Brenda, it did not work. Over the next 2 weeks, several residents received citations from the city for various code violations. Overgrown bushes, cracked sidewalks, faded house numbers. None of the violations were serious, but they were annoying and required time and money to fix. It became clear that Brenda was walking around the neighborhood, documenting every minor issue she could find and reporting it to the city. The final straw came when Brenda filed a complaint with the city about my business. She claimed that I was operating a commercial enterprise out of a residential property, which violated zoning laws. The city sent an inspector to my house, who looked at my trucks parked in the driveway and my small office set up in the spare bedroom. The inspector was a middle-aged guy named Dave who seemed sympathetic. "Look, I have to follow up on the complaint, but honestly, this is pretty borderline. You're not running a retail operation or causing any disturbances. You're just parking your trucks here and doing some paperwork. I don't see a problem." "So I'm good?" I asked. "For now," Dave said, "but the person who filed the complaint is persistent. She's called my office 4 times in the past week. If she keeps pushing, my boss might decide it's easier to just issue a violation and let you fight it in court." I felt my anger rising again. Brenda was relentless, and she was clearly determined to make my life hell, even after being removed from the board. I decided it was time to fight back, but this time, I would do it the right way. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Teresa Gallo who specialized in HOA disputes and property law. I explained the entire situation to her, from the initial fines to the slow plowing incident to Brenda's ongoing harassment. Teresa listened carefully, taking notes, and then leaned back in her chair. "You have a strong case for harassment. Brenda's behavior is clearly retaliatory, and she's using city resources to pursue a personal vendetta. We can file a restraining order and possibly sue for damages." "I don't want money," I said. "I just want her to stop. Then we'll focus on the restraining order. But I have to warn you, this could get ugly. If she fights it, we'll have to go to court and air all of this publicly." "I'm okay with that," I said. "I'm done being harassed." Teresa filed the petition for a restraining order, citing Brenda's pattern of harassment and retaliation. The court scheduled a hearing for 2 weeks later. Brenda showed up to the hearing with her own lawyer, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit who clearly thought this was beneath him. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Hernandez, listened to both sides present their cases. Teresa laid out the timeline of events, starting with the initial fines, moving through the slow plowing incident, and ending with Brenda's ongoing efforts to file complaints with the city. She presented copies of all the fines, the termination letter, the city complaints, and witness statements from several residents who had seen Brenda prowling around the neighborhood at night. Brenda's lawyer argued that his client was simply exercising her rights as a citizen to report code violations, and that she had no obligation to stop monitoring the neighborhood just because she was no longer on the HOA board. Judge Hernandez was not impressed. "Mr. Cosgrove, your client has filed over 20 complaints with the city in the past month, all targeting residents who supported her removal from the HOA board. That's not civic duty, that's harassment. I'm granting the restraining order. Miss Killinger, you are to cease all contact with Mr. Ashford and refrain from filing any complaints with the city regarding his property or business. If you violate this order, you will be held in contempt." Brenda's face went white and she started to protest, but the judge cut her off. "I'm not finished. I'm also ordering you to undergo a psychological evaluation. Your behavior suggests an unhealthy obsession with control and retaliation, and I want a professional to assess whether you pose a risk to yourself or others." Brenda's lawyer tried to object, but the judge shut him down. "This is not a negotiation, counselor. Your client can comply voluntarily, or I can make it a condition of avoiding further legal action. Her choice." The hearing ended and Brenda stormed out of the courtroom without looking at me. I thanked Teresa and went home, feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but Brenda was not done yet. 2 days after the hearing, I got a call from Gerald. He sounded shaken. "Marcus, you need to know something. Brenda has been arrested." "What? For what?" "Breaking and entering, vandalism, and violating the restraining order. She broke into your house last night and trashed your office." I felt my stomach drop. I had been out late the previous night, plowing a client's parking lot after a small snowfall. I had come home around 2 in the morning, exhausted, and gone straight to bed without checking my office. I ran upstairs to the spare bedroom and found it in shambles. Papers were scattered everywhere. My desk drawers had been pulled out and emptied, and someone had spray painted the word cheater across the wall in bright red letters. My computer was smashed, the screen shattered, and the keyboard ripped off. I called the police, and an officer came out to take a report. He confirmed that Brenda had been arrested after a neighbor saw her leaving my house and called it in. She was currently being held at the Macomb County Jail, awaiting arraignment. "She's looking at some serious charges," the officer said. "Breaking and entering, vandalism, stalking, violating a restraining order. She could be facing jail time." I sat down heavily on the edge of the desk, staring at the destruction around me. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How had it come to this? All because I was 1 hour late plowing my driveway. Brenda's arraignment was held 3 days later. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching as she stood before the judge. She looked terrible, like she had not slept in days. Her hair was messy, her clothes rumpled, and she had a vacant, defeated look in her eyes. The prosecutor outlined the charges and presented evidence, including the neighbor's testimony, security camera footage from another house on the street that had caught Brenda walking toward my house with a backpack, and the physical evidence from my trashed office. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that she was under extreme stress and not in her right mind, but the judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Killinger, you have repeatedly ignored court orders, harassed multiple individuals, and now committed serious criminal acts. I am denying bail and ordering you to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation before we proceed further. You will remain in custody until that evaluation is complete." Brenda was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I left feeling numb. Over the next few weeks, the story spread through the community. Residents were shocked, horrified, and in some cases, vindicated. Many of the people who had been fined or harassed by Brenda over the years felt a sense of justice, but there was also a sadness to it all. Brenda had let her need for control consume her to the point where she destroyed her own life. The psychiatric evaluation revealed that Brenda had been suffering from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, exacerbated by the stress of her removal from the HOA board. The psychologist recommended treatment and counseling, but also noted that her actions were deliberate and calculated, not the result of a complete break from reality. In the end, Brenda pled guilty to breaking and entering, vandalism, and violating the restraining order. She was sentenced to 18 months in jail, with credit for time served, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my office, which totaled about $5,000. I used the money to replace my computer and repair the wall, and I tried to move on with my life. The HOA, under Gerald's leadership, became a much more reasonable organization. They revised the bylaws to focus on major issues rather than petty violations, and they created an appeals process for residents who felt they had been unfairly fined. The community became more collaborative and less combative, and people actually started to enjoy living there again. As for me, I continued running my snow removal business and fulfilled my contract with the HOA without any further issues. When winter came around again, I plowed the streets of Maple Ridge Estates at a normal, efficient pace, and nobody complained. I never did get another fine for snow-related violations. One afternoon in early spring, after the last of the snow had melted and I was putting my equipment away for the season, I ran into Gerald at the local hardware store. He was buying mulch for his garden, and we struck up a conversation. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. "Things have calmed down a lot. I'm glad. You know, I've been thinking about what happened with Brenda. I feel like we, the board, should have done more to stop her before it got to that point. We knew she was over the top, but we just let it go because she was getting things done." "It's not your fault," I said. "Brenda made her own choices." "Maybe," Gerald said, "but I think there's a lesson here for all of us. Rules are important, but so is compassion. So is understanding that people are human and make mistakes. Brenda forgot that, and it destroyed her." I nodded. "That's a good way to put it." We chatted for a few more minutes, then went our separate ways. As I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The fines, the slow plowing, the harassment, the arrest. It had been a wild ride, and I was glad it was over. But I also realized that I had learned something important. Fighting fire with fire might feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely leads to a good outcome. I had made my point by plowing slowly and making everyone late, but it had also caused real harm to innocent people. The nurse who could not get to the hospital, the parents who could not pick up their kids, the workers who missed important meetings. They had not done anything wrong, but they suffered because of my petty revenge. I did not regret standing up to Brenda, but I wished I had found a better way to do it. Maybe if I had organized the residents earlier, or pushed back harder at the board meetings, or hired a lawyer from the start, things would not have escalated the way they did. Then again, maybe some people just need to learn the hard way. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Brenda, written from the Macomb County Jail. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and handwritten in shaky cursive. It read, Mr. Ashford, I know you have no reason to believe me, but I want to apologize for everything I put you through. I let my need for control and order become an obsession, and I hurt a lot of people because of it. I am getting help now, and I am starting to understand how wrong I was. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I am sorry. Brenda Killinger. I read the letter twice, then folded it up and put it in a drawer. I did not know if Brenda's apology was genuine or just part of her therapy, and honestly, it did not matter much to me. The damage was done, and no amount of apologizing would undo it. But I appreciated the gesture, and I hoped, for her sake, that she really was getting better. Life in Maple Ridge Estates returned to normal. The HOA continued to function under Gerald's steady leadership, and the community slowly healed from the chaos of the past year. People stopped looking over their shoulders for violations, stopped worrying about petty fines, and started actually talking to each other like neighbors again. I expanded my business, adding a 5th truck and taking on more commercial clients. Jake turned out to be a great employee, and I promoted him to lead driver. My reputation in the area grew, and I started getting calls from other HOAs and property management companies asking for bids. One of those calls came from a subdivision in Clinton Township, about 15 minutes from Maple Ridge Estates. The HOA president, a friendly woman named Carol, explained that they were looking for a new snow removal contractor and had heard good things about my work. "I have to ask," Carol said during our initial meeting, "are you the same Marcus Ashford who had that whole situation with the Maple Ridge HOA last year?" I hesitated, not sure if this was going to hurt or help my chances. "Yes, that was me," Carol laughed. "Good. I heard about what you did, plowing super slowly to prove a point. That's hilarious. Don't worry, we're nothing like that here. We just want someone reliable who will do a good job and not cause drama." I got the contract, and it turned out Carol was right. The Clinton Township HOA was laid back, reasonable, and easy to work with. No petty fines, no harassment, no drama. Just honest work for honest pay. As the months went by, I found myself thinking less and less about Brenda and the whole mess. It became just another story, something I would tell at parties, or when people asked how I got started in the snow removal business. The anger faded, replaced by a kind of bemused acceptance that sometimes people are just difficult, and there is not much you can do about it except stand your ground and hope for the best. Winter came around again, and with it came the snow. I plowed driveways and parking lots, streets and sidewalks, working long hours in the cold and making sure my clients could go about their lives. It was hard work, but it was satisfying, and I was good at it. One evening in late February, I was finishing up a job at a shopping center when my phone rang. It was Gerald. "Hey Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up. Brenda got out of jail last week. She served her time and she is on probation now." I felt a flicker of anxiety. "Is she back in the neighborhood?" "No, she moved out, sold her house and relocated somewhere downstate, I think. I just wanted you to know in case you were worried." "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "No problem. And hey, I know this whole thing was tough, but I think it made our community stronger. People are more involved now, more willing to speak up when something is not right. So thank you for that." I hung up and sat in my truck for a moment, watching the snow fall gently outside the window. Brenda was gone, the HOA was better, and life was moving forward. It was not a perfect ending, but it was a good one. I started the truck and headed home, ready to face whatever came next. The following spring, the Maple Ridge HOA held its annual meeting, and I was invited to attend as a guest. They wanted to recognize me for my work over the past year, and present me with a plaque thanking me for my service to the community. I showed up to the clubhouse and found it packed with residents, many of whom I recognized from the various meetings and encounters over the past year. Gerald stood at the front of the room and called everyone to order. Before we get into the regular business, I want to take a moment to recognize someone who has been an important part of our community. Marcus Ashford, could you come up here, please? I walked to the front of the room, feeling a little embarrassed by all the attention. Gerald handed me a wooden plaque with an engraved brass plate that read, "Presented to Marcus Ashford in recognition of outstanding service and dedication to the Maple Ridge Estates community." Everyone applauded and several people stood up. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. Gerald shook my hand. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." "You're welcome," I said, "and thank you for turning this place around." The meeting continued, and I sat in the back, listening as the board discussed routine matters like landscaping budgets and pool maintenance schedules. It was boring, normal, and exactly what an HOA meeting should be. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me personally and share their own stories about dealing with Brenda. It was cathartic, in a way, to hear that I was not the only one who had struggled with her obsessive enforcement of the rules. An older man named Frank, who lived a few streets over, pulled me aside. "You know, what you did with that slow plowing thing that took guts. A lot of people were mad at the time, but looking back, it was the wake-up call this community needed." Brenda had been running roughshod over everyone for years, and nobody had the courage to stand up to her. "You did, and it changed everything." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I also caused a lot of people a lot of inconvenience. I'm not proud of that part." Frank waved a hand dismissively. "Inconvenience is temporary. What you did, the change you brought about, that's permanent. This is a better place because of you." I left the meeting feeling a sense of closure. The nightmare with Brenda was truly over, and the community had moved on. I had played a role in that, for better or worse, and I could live with that. Over the next few years, my business continued to grow. I added more trucks, hired more employees, and expanded into landscaping and property maintenance during the off-season. Maple Ridge Estates remained one of my best clients, and my relationship with the HOA stayed strong. I never heard from Brenda again. According to rumors that filtered back through the community, she had moved to a small town in the Upper Peninsula and was working as a librarian. I hoped she had found peace and learned to let go of her need for control. As for me, I learned that sometimes standing up for yourself means making hard choices and accepting the consequences. I learned that rules are important, but so is compassion and common sense. And I learned that communities are stronger when people work together instead of tearing each other down. It was a hard lesson, learned through conflict and frustration, but it was worth it. And every time it snows and I fire up my truck to go plow, I think about that week in January when I made every commuter in Maple Ridge Estates late for work. I think about the anger, the frustration, the satisfaction of proving my point, and the guilt of knowing I hurt innocent people in the process. I would not do it again, not exactly the same way. But I also would not take it back because it led to something better. It led to change, to growth, to a community that learned to balance rules with humanity. And in the end, that is what really matters.